You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. The gravel crunches under my tyres as I pull into the familiar circular driveway, the sound echoing off the towering oak trees that have stood sentinel over this property for longer than anyone can remember. After 23 years of making this pilgrimage, you'd think the sight of the old Victorian mansion would feel like coming home. Instead, it fills me with the same uneasy anticipation it always has, like stepping into a photograph that's been slightly overexposed, where all the shadows seem deeper and all the bright spots seem too harsh. I'm Marcus Thompson, 31 years old, and this hulking 3-story house with its wraparound porch, Gothic windows, and elaborate gingerbread trim has been in our family since 1872. Every Memorial Day weekend, without fail, every living blood relative makes the pilgrimage here to rural Pennsylvania, to the small town of Millbrook, where the Thompson name still carries weight and whispered stories. I grab my overnight bag from the back seat and take a deep breath. The air smells different here than it does back home in Philadelphia. Older somehow, heavy with the scent of pine trees, wild honeysuckle, and something else I've never been able to identify. Something sweet but slightly sour, like flowers left too long in stagnant water, or fruit that's just begun to turn. The mansion looms before me, its dark red brick facade and black shutters giving it an imposing presence against the overcast May sky. Turrets rise from each corner, topped with wrought iron weather vanes that creak softly in the breeze. The wraparound porch is adorned with intricate woodwork, painted crisp white, though I can see places where the paint has begun to peel, revealing the weathered wood beneath. My grandmother Elena is waiting on the porch just as she has every year since I was 5 years old. At 89, she's frailer than last year, her silver hair thinner, and her once sturdy frame now requiring the support of a carved wooden cane. But her eyes are as sharp and commanding as ever, pale blue and piercing, missing nothing. She's wearing her usual black dress with the cameo brooch, the one that belonged to her grandmother, and features the profile of a stern-faced woman I've never been able to identify from family records. "Marcus," she says, her voice carrying that familiar authority that made me clean my plate and mind my manners as a child. "You're the 18th to arrive. We're still waiting on 5 more." I kiss her cheek and notice how cold her skin feels, even in the warm May afternoon. Her hand, when she pats my arm, feels like parchment stretched over bird bones. "Who are we missing, Grandma?" "Your cousin Patricia and her boy Jake, Uncle Norman and the Hendricks twins." She checks the antique watch pinned to her dress, a delicate silver piece with Roman numerals and hands that seem to move just slightly too slowly. "They have until 5 o'clock. The rules don't wait for stragglers." The rules. Even thinking about them makes my stomach tighten and my palms grow damp. I've been following them since childhood without question, watching as each generation teaches them to the next, with the solemnity of a sacred ritual, like priests passing down ancient liturgy. Some of my younger cousins used to joke about them when we were teenagers, calling them outdated family traditions or elaborate pranks designed to keep the kids in line. But those jokes stopped after cousin Amanda died in 2003, after great uncle Frederick vanished in 1987, after too many empty chairs at too many Memorial Day dinners, too many whispered conversations that ended abruptly when children entered the room. Inside, the house feels exactly as it always has. Too cold, too quiet, filled with shadows that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. The floorboards creak in the same spots they've creaked for decades, each one a familiar note in the house's wooden symphony. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticks with the same irregular rhythm that has marked time here since before I was born. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, never quite keeping perfect time with the outside world. The foyer is dominated by a massive staircase that curves upward to the second floor, its mahogany banister worn smooth by generations of hands. Family portraits line the walls, faces from different eras staring down with expressions that range from stern to melancholy. I've studied these pictures countless times over the years, noting how the eyes of certain subjects seem to follow you as you move through the room. That persistent cold draft flows from the direction of the basement door, a heavy oak barrier with black iron hinges that stands at the end of the main hallway. Even now, in the middle of the afternoon with sunshine streaming through the windows, the area around that door seems dimmer than the rest of the house, as if light itself is reluctant to linger there. My sister Jessica waves from the kitchen where she's helping prepare dinner. At 29, she looks remarkably like our mother did at the same age. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same quick smile that never quite reaches her eyes when we're in this house. Her twin daughters, Emma and Grace, both 7 years old, are sitting at the kitchen table with colouring books spread before them. Emma looks up and grins when she sees me, but Grace keeps her head down, her blonde curls hiding her face as she works intently on her drawing with a dark purple crayon. "Uncle Marcus!" Emma jumps up and hugs my legs. "Look what I drew." She shows me a picture of what appears to be a family gathering, stick figures arranged around a large rectangle that I assume is meant to be a table. But something about the drawing troubles me. One of the figures is coloured completely black while the others are rendered in normal colours. "That's very nice, sweetheart. Who's the dark figure?" "That's the sad lady who stands in the corner," Emma says matter-of-factly. "She comes to dinner with us, but she can't eat anything because she's already finished." Jessica quickly takes the drawing away, her cheeks flushing. "She's been having strange dreams since we got here this morning," she whispers to me. "Drawing pictures like this and talking about invisible friends. Kids and their imaginations, you know. But I don't think it's imagination. Not in this house, not with our family's history." "What are you making there, Gracie?" I ask, ruffling her hair. She finally looks up and I'm struck by how serious her expression is, how adult her eyes seem in her child's face. "It's the sad people," she says, showing me a drawing. It's a crude child sketch, but unmistakably depicts multiple figures standing outside a house, their faces pressed against windows. She's used dark colours, purples and blacks and deep blues, and the figures seem to be reaching toward the house with outstretched arms. They want to come inside, but they can't. They're very cold. An uncomfortable silence settles over the kitchen. Jessica tries to laugh it off, but her voice sounds strained. She's been drawing pictures like this all day. I think she watched too many scary movies before we came. But I noticed that our father David, who's been quietly reading a newspaper at the kitchen counter, has put down his paper and is studying Grace's drawing with intense interest. His face has gone pale, and I see him exchange a meaningful look with our mother Ruth, who's been arranging flowers in a vase by the window. "Grace, honey," Dad says gently, "where exactly are these sad people standing?" "All around the house," Grace replies, adding more dark scribbles to her drawing, "but mostly by the pretty flower garden. They like the flowers, but they can't smell them anymore." The rose garden. My blood runs cold at the mention of it. Before anyone can respond, the front door opens with a creak that echoes through the house, and Patricia arrives with her 16-year-old son Jake. Patricia is my father's younger sister, a woman in her early 50s with prematurely grey hair and worry lines etched deep around her eyes. She's been coming to these reunions for over 40 years, and the stress of them shows in her face. Jake trails behind her, a typical teenager with shaggy brown hair and an expression of barely contained boredom. He's got his phone in his hand, probably frustrated by the poor cell service that plagues this rural area. He's been to several reunions before, but this is his first year being old enough to truly understand the weight of our family's traditions. Uncle Norman shuffles in behind them, his cane tapping against the hardwood floor with each careful step. At 91, he's the oldest living member of our family and has been coming to these reunions for over 70 years. If anyone knows the truth behind our family's traditions, it's him. His mind is still sharp despite his age, and his roomy blue eyes hold secrets that he's never fully shared with the younger generations. "Norman," Grandmother Eleanor greets him warmly. "How was the drive?" "Long," he replies in his gravelly voice, "but worth it. The old place looks the same as ever." He pauses, leaning heavily on his cane as he surveys the foyer. Feels the same too, still got that chill in the air, still got that feeling like you're being watched. The Hendricks twins, my second cousins, Rachel and Rebecca, arrive just as the grandfather clock chimes 5 o'clock. They're identical twins, in their mid-30s, both tall and thin, with dark hair and pale skin. They've always been quiet at these gatherings, keeping mostly to themselves and speaking in the sort of shorthand that twins sometimes develop. Grandmother Elena nods approvingly and claps her hands together, the sound sharp and commanding in the quiet house. 23, she announces, all accounted for. Now gather in the parlour. It's time for the reading. We file into the front parlour like we have every year. A solemn procession that feels more like entering a church than a family room. The parlour is a formal space that clearly hasn't been updated since the 1940s. Burgundy velvet furniture sits arranged in a precise semicircle, the fabric worn but still rich. Heavy brocade curtains frame tall windows that look out onto the front lawn and the circular driveway beyond. The walls are covered in dark wood panelling, and oil paintings of long-dead ancestors peer down at us from gilded frames. The room smells of old books and lavender sachets, with undertones of something mustier, the scent of age and secrets and things better left undisturbed. A marble fireplace dominates one wall, its mantel decorated with antique photographs and curiosities collected over generations. Crystal decanters filled with amber liquids sit on a side table, their contents untouched for decades. We take our usual spots on the burgundy velvet furniture that's remained unchanged since my childhood. I find myself sitting in the same chair I've occupied for years, its cushions moulded to my form through repetition. Grandmother Eleanor positions herself in front of the marble fireplace, her back straight despite her age, her cane planted firmly before her like a staff of office. As the eldest, it is my duty to remind you all of the rules that have kept this family safe for generations, she begins, her voice carrying clearly through the room, despite its relative frailness. These are not suggestions. They are not negotiable. They are not quaint family traditions or elaborate jokes. They have been followed without exception since this house was built in 1872, and they will continue to be followed as long as Thompson blood flows in your veins. Even though I've heard this speech countless times, something about the way she says it this year sends chills down my spine. There's an urgency in her voice that wasn't there before, a desperation that makes me think she knows something the rest of us don't. Rule number 1, the midnight vigil. Each night of our reunion, someone must remain awake and seated in this very chair from 11:45 until 12:15 in the morning. You will hold great-great-grandfather Ezekiel's pocket watch during this time. You must not leave the chair. You must not sleep. You must not speak to anyone or anything that may approach you during these 30 minutes. She holds up an ornate silver pocket watch, its surface tarnished with age and wear. I've seen it every year, but I've never really looked at it closely before. Now I notice the strange engravings around its edge, symbols that don't look like any language I recognize, intertwined with what might be vines or tentacles or something else entirely. The watch face itself is an unusual pale yellow color, almost ivory, and the hands are made of what looks like blackened silver. This watch belonged to our ancestor, Ezekiel Thompson, who built this house and established our family's presence in Millbrook. It has kept time for our family for over 150 years, and it must never be allowed to stop during the vigil hours. Rule number 2, the threshold rule. The basement door must remain locked from sunset to sunrise. The iron key stays with me at all times during the dark hours. No one crosses that threshold during this period, regardless of what you may hear from below. My eyes drift to the basement door, visible through the parlour doorway at the end of the hall. It's heavy oak, with black iron hinges that look hand-forged, and there's always been something deeply unsettling about it. Even in full daylight, the space around it seems dimmer than the rest of the house, as if shadows gather there naturally. I've never been in the basement during daylight hours either. Grandmother Elena keeps it locked at all times, claiming it's unsafe due to structural issues. Rule number 3, the window protocol. All curtains on the second floor must be drawn shut by 9 o'clock each evening and cannot be opened until after 6 in the morning. No exceptions, no matter what you may see or think you see outside. I think about my bedroom window upstairs, how it faces the rose garden and the woods beyond. I've always wondered what might be visible from those windows during the night hours, what might be watching the house while we sleep. Rule number 4, the garden boundary. No family member may enter the rose garden behind the house between 8 in the evening and 8 in the morning. The garden gate must remain closed and latched during these hours. The rose garden is one of the most beautiful features of the property during daylight hours. Elaborate, wrought iron gates open onto carefully maintained beds of red roses, white gravel paths, and ornate stone benches. But I've noticed that the roses themselves are unusual. They're a deep, dark red that's almost black in certain light, and they seem to bloom year-round regardless of weather or season. The garden is surrounded by high hedges that block the view from most of the house's windows, creating a private, enclosed space. Rule number 5, the photograph ritual. Every family photo taken during our reunion must include exactly 24 people. If someone is absent, an empty chair must be placed in their position. This rule has always puzzled me more than the others. We have 23 family members present, yet the photos must include 24 positions. When I was younger, I assumed it was to honour deceased relatives or perhaps to account for family members who couldn't attend. Now, looking at Grandmother Elena's grave expression and remembering the translucent figures in some of the older family photographs, I suspect the truth is far more sinister. Rule number 6, the silence hour. Between 3 and 4 in the morning, absolute silence must be maintained throughout the house. No talking, no walking, no opening of doors, no sounds of any kind. Even breathing should be kept as quiet as possible. She sets the pocket watch on the mantel with a decisive click and surveys our faces with those piercing blue eyes. Does anyone have questions about these rules? The room is dead silent except for the irregular ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Even the younger children seem to understand the gravity of the moment. Jake, Patricia's teenage son, shifts uncomfortably in his chair and opens his mouth as if to speak, then seems to think better of it and looks at the floor. Good, Grandmother Elena continues. Now some of you may be wondering why we follow these traditions. Some of you may think they're outdated superstitions from a bygone era. Her gaze settles on Jake, who immediately looks even more uncomfortable. Let me be crystal clear. These rules exist because breaking them has consequences. Fatal consequences. Uncle Norman clears his throat, a sound like rustling paper. Tell them about Frederick, he says quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades. Grandmother Elena's face hardens, her mouth setting into a thin line. Uncle Frederick thought he knew better. In 1987, he decided our rules were foolish old-world nonsense. He was a modern man, he said, a man of science and reason. He had a PhD in physics from Penn State and couldn't accept that there might be forces in this world that couldn't be explained by equations and theories. She pauses, letting the weight of her words sink in. The room seems to grow colder as she speaks. On the second night of the reunion, Frederick broke the threshold rule. He picked the lock on the basement door and went down into the cellar, claiming he wanted to investigate the source of the family's delusions. We found his body at the bottom of the basement stairs the next morning. The coroner said his heart simply stopped. No trauma, no signs of struggle, no explanation for why a healthy 34-year-old man would simply drop dead. But that wasn't the strangest part, Uncle Norman adds, his voice barely above a whisper. The strangest part was his expression. He looked terrified, absolutely terrified, but also peaceful. Like he'd seen something horrible, but had finally understood something important. "And Amanda?" asks my father David, speaking for the first time since we'd gathered. "Cousin Amanda violated the garden boundary in 2003. She was found among the roses at dawn, frozen solid, despite the fact that it was a warm May morning with no frost anywhere else on the property. The medical examiner couldn't explain how a human body could freeze so completely in such a short time, or why the roses around her were blooming more vibrantly than they had in years. The room feels significantly colder now, and I notice that Emma has moved closer to her mother. She's staring intently at something in the corner of the room, but when I follow her gaze, there's nothing there but shadow and the subtle play of afternoon light through the heavy curtains. There have been others over the years, Grandmother Eleanor continues, her voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. Each one thought they were clever enough or brave enough to ignore our family's wisdom. Cousin Daniel in 1975 spoke during the silence hour and was found dead in his bed with his mouth full of soil from the garden. Great Aunt Margaret opened the second floor curtains during the night in 1963 and simply vanished. Her room was empty in the morning, but her screams woke the entire house. We never found her body. She walks to the mantel and picks up one of the antique photographs, a formal family portrait from what looks like the 1920s. And then there's the most instructive case of all, my own brother Thomas in 1945. He was convinced that the midnight vigil was unnecessary, that sitting in a chair holding a pocket watch was mere superstition. So he decided to test his theory. I lean forward despite myself. I've never heard this story before. Thomas took his vigil shift as assigned, but instead of remaining seated and holding the watch, he set it on the side table and walked around the room. He wanted to prove that nothing would happen, that our family's fears were groundless. Her voice drops to barely above a whisper. At 12:07 that night, every person in the house was awakened by the most horrible screaming you can imagine. We found Thomas in the parlour, but he wasn't himself anymore. "What do you mean?" Jake asks, his teenage bravado finally overcome by genuine fear. His body was there, breathing and alive, but his mind was gone. Completely gone. He couldn't speak, couldn't recognize anyone, couldn't even feed himself. He spent the remaining 43 years of his life in a care facility, staring at nothing and responding to no one. But sometimes on Memorial Day weekends, he would become agitated and try to tell the nurses something urgent. The only word he ever spoke again was watch. Just that one word, over and over. Watch, watch, watch. The silence that follows this revelation is profound and unsettling. I can hear my own heartbeat in my ears, and the grandfather clock's irregular ticking seems unnaturally loud. But here's what troubles me most, Grandmother Elena continues, returning the photograph to its place on the mantel. In recent years, the presence that inhabits this house has grown stronger, more active, more hungry. Last year's vigil shifts reported more intense phenomena than ever before. The voices were louder, the cold more bitter, the sense of something pressing against the boundaries of our protection more persistent. She turns to face us again, and I'm struck by how old and frail she suddenly looks. I fear that my time as guardian of these traditions is coming to an end. When I'm gone, the responsibility will fall to one of you. You must be prepared to carry on what has kept our family alive for 6 generations. Uncle Norman nods gravely. The house chooses its own guardians, he says. Elena wasn't supposed to be the one. It should have been her older brother Robert. But Robert died in Korea and the responsibility fell to her. How does it choose? I ask, surprising myself by speaking. Grandmother Elena looks at me with those piercing eyes, and I feel as though she's seeing straight through to my soul. You'll know when it happens, she says simply. The house makes its preferences clear. She picks up the pocket watch again. Marcus, you'll take the first vigil tonight. My stomach drops like I've just been told I have a terminal illness. I've taken the vigil shift before, but something about this year feels fundamentally different. The atmosphere in the house is more oppressive than usual, charged with an electricity that makes my skin crawl. And Grandmother Elena seems more frightened than I've ever seen her, despite her attempts to maintain her authoritative demeanor. After the meeting, we disperse throughout the house to settle in for the weekend. The afternoon passes with the typical reunion activities, unpacking, catching up on family news, exploring the house and grounds. But there's an undercurrent of tension that wasn't there in previous years, a sense that we're all waiting for something to happen. I end up in my usual room on the 2nd floor, the same one I've stayed in since childhood. It's a modest space with faded floral wallpaper, a twin bed with a brass frame, and a single window that faces the rose garden. The view is actually quite beautiful during daylight hours. The carefully maintained flower beds create geometric patterns of deep red blooms, and the wrought iron benches and decorative urns give the space an old-world elegance. But as I unpack my bag, I find myself staring down at those perfectly manicured beds of dark red roses, wondering what really happened to Amanda that night 18 years ago. What did she see in the garden that drew her past the safety of the iron gate? What was waiting for her among the flowers? The roses themselves seem almost unnatural in their perfection. Each bloom is exactly the same size and colour, a deep crimson that's so dark it's nearly black in the shadows. The bushes are perfectly shaped, not a single leaf out of place, not a single petal wilted or fallen. It's the kind of garden that requires constant maintenance, yet I've never seen gardeners working on the property. As the afternoon wears on, I notice other family members gravitating toward the windows that offer views of the garden. We're all drawn to it somehow, despite the warnings we've received. Rachel and Rebecca, the Hendricks twins, spend nearly an hour standing at the kitchen window that overlooks the garden's eastern edge. When I ask them what they find so fascinating, they exchange one of their meaningful twin looks and simply say that the roses are particularly beautiful this year. Dinner is a subdued affair compared to our usual family gatherings. The dining room table, which normally hosts lively conversations and bursts of laughter, feels oppressive under the weight of unspoken fears. We eat roast beef and potatoes, traditional reunion fare, but the food tastes flat and unappetizing. Conversations start and die quickly. More than once I catch relatives glancing nervously at the windows as darkness begins to fall outside. The dining room itself is another unchanged relic of the house's Victorian origins. Dark wood panelling rises to meet wallpaper in a pattern of deep green leaves and gold accents. A massive crystal chandelier hangs over the table, its dozens of faceted pieces catching and reflecting the light in ways that create dancing shadows on the walls. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watch us eat, their eyes seeming to follow our movements. Emma, Jessica's daughter, has barely touched her food. She keeps looking over her shoulder at the corner of the dining room, where nothing is visible but the intersection of two walls and the edge of an antique hutch filled with china. "Who are you looking for, sweetie?" asks Patricia, trying to inject some normalcy into the tense atmosphere. "The children," Emma says matter-of-factly, cutting her meat into tiny pieces but not eating any of it. "They're hungry, but they can't eat. They just watch us and remember what food tastes like." An uncomfortable silence settles over the table like a heavy blanket. Jessica tries to laugh it off, but her voice sounds strained and artificial. She has quite an imagination. But Uncle Norman is studying Emma with intense interest, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "What do the children look like?" he asks gently. "Sad," Emma replies without hesitation. "They wear old clothes like in the pictures upstairs. The little girl has braids with ribbons, but the ribbons are all faded. The boy has short pants and suspenders, but they're too big for him now. Sometimes they wave at me, but when I wave back, they get scared and disappear." Grandmother Elena drops her fork with a clatter that seems unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Norman, take the child upstairs, now." As Uncle Norman carefully helps Emma from her chair and leads her towards the staircase, I hear her asking, in her innocent 7-year-old voice, "Why can't the sad children come to dinner with us? Don't they miss their families too?" The question hangs in the air long after Emma's footsteps fade up the stairs, and I notice that several of the adults have stopped eating entirely. Grace, Emma's twin sister, continues colouring in her book throughout the meal, but she's switched to using only black and dark purple crayons, creating images that are too abstract for me to interpret, but somehow deeply unsettling to look at. The rest of the meal passes in tense silence, broken only by the clink of silverware against china and the occasional creak of the old house settling around us. By 8 o'clock, everyone has finished eating, though most plates still contain significant amounts of food. The kitchen cleanup is accomplished quickly and quietly, with family members working together in the efficient, wordless way that comes from years of shared routine. By 9 o'clock, the window protocol is in effect, and I can hear the sound of curtains being drawn throughout the second floor. The sound is oddly synchronized, as if everyone is following the same internal clock. Heavy fabric slides across curtain rods, and the house suddenly feels more enclosed, more cut off from the outside world. I spend the hours before my vigil shift in the library, a room I've always found comforting, despite the house's generally unsettling atmosphere. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves line 3 walls, filled with volumes that span centuries of literature, history, and scientific treatises. A large fireplace dominates the 4th wall, flanked by leather chairs that have been worn soft by generations of readers. The books themselves are fascinating. First editions of classics, scientific journals from the 1800s, treatises on subjects ranging from agriculture to astronomy. But scattered throughout the collection are stranger volumes, books on folklore and superstition, treatises on the supernatural, academic papers on topics like ancestral hauntings in rural communities and the persistence of pre-Christian beliefs in modern America. One book in particular catches my attention, a leather-bound journal with no title on its spine. When I pull it from the shelf, I discover that it's actually a collection of handwritten accounts by previous family members, documenting their experiences during Memorial Day reunions dating back to the 1920s. The entries make for disturbing reading. From 1934, the voices during my vigil were more insistent than in previous years. They knew my name, knew details about my life that no living person could know. They begged me to open the door, to let them in from the cold. The watch stopped for nearly 3 minutes, at 12:05, and during that time, the temperature in the room dropped so low that ice formed on the windows. From 1956, I saw them clearly this year. Dozens of figures standing in the garden, pressing against the iron gate. Some wore modern clothes, but others were dressed in fashions from decades past. They all looked like family, but their faces were wrong somehow, too pale, too thin, eyes too large and dark. One of them looked exactly like my brother Thomas, the one who broke the vigil rules in 1945. He mouthed my name over and over, but no sound came from his lips. From 1978, the basement door rattled constantly throughout the night, as if someone was pulling on the handle from the other side. Scratching sounds came from behind the walls, like fingernails dragging across wood. During the silence hour, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room, but when I looked out my door at 4:01, there was no one there. The accounts continue year after year, each one describing phenomena that grow progressively more intense and more frightening. The most recent entries from the past few years describe experiences that seem almost supernatural in their intensity from just 2 years ago. The pocket watch became burning hot during my vigil, so hot that it left marks on my palms. The voices outside weren't just begging anymore. They were demanding, threatening, making promises of what they would do if I let them in. The cold was so intense that my breath came out as clouds of ice crystals, and frost spread across every surface in the room. At 12:10, something began pounding on the front door with such force that the entire house shook. I closed the journal with trembling hands. These aren't the accounts of imaginative or superstitious people. They're detailed, matter-of-fact descriptions written by educated adults who are trying to document real experiences. And if the pattern holds true, tonight's vigil will be even more intense than anything described in these pages. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimes 10 o'clock. Its irregular rhythm somehow more noticeable in the nighttime quiet. The house has fallen into its unnatural silence, with no creaking floorboards from family members moving around upstairs, no distant conversations or television sounds. Just the ticking of various clocks throughout the house and the whisper of wind through the old windows. At 11:30, I make my way to the parlour, my footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floors. The house feels different at night, larger somehow, with shadows that seem deeper and doorways that appear to lead into absolute darkness. The family portraits that line the hallways seem more lifelike in the dim light, their eyes following my movement with unsettling persistence. Grandmother Elena is waiting for me in the parlour, the pocket watch cradled in her weathered hands. She's changed into a heavy wool robe, and I notice that she's shivering despite the relative warmth of the evening. "Sit here," she says, indicating the high-backed chair that faces the front windows. It's an imposing piece of furniture, carved from dark wood and upholstered in burgundy velvet. The chair has arms that extend forward slightly, creating a throne-like appearance. Hold the watch. Do not let go of it for any reason. Do not set it down. Do not pass it to anyone else. Do not let it leave your hands. I settle into the chair, and she presses the watch into my palm. It's surprisingly heavy and warm, as if it's been sitting near a fire. The metal seems to pulse slightly like a heartbeat, and I can feel the mechanism ticking against my palm with unusual force. "Do not speak to anything that may approach you during the next 30 minutes, she continues, her voice urgent and frightened. "Do not respond to voices calling your name. Do not answer questions. Do not acknowledge anything you see or hear, no matter how real it seems or how desperately it pleads with you." "Grandma," I start to ask, but she cuts me off with a sharp gesture. "No questions, Marcus. Just follow the rules, exactly as they've been given to you." She places her hand on my shoulder, and I'm shocked at how cold her fingers are. "Whatever you see or hear during the next 30 minutes, remember that you are protected as long as you remain seated and hold the watch. The moment you break that protection, you become vulnerable to forces that have been waiting decades for the opportunity to claim another member of our family." She kisses my forehead, something she hasn't done since I was a small child, and her lips feel like ice against my skin. "I'll see you at 12:15, she whispers, but there's something in her voice that suggests she's not entirely certain that's true. Then she leaves me alone in the parlour, her footsteps fading up the stairs until I'm surrounded by complete silence. At exactly 11:45, according to the pocket watch, I settle deeper into the chair and focus on the weight of the timepiece in my hands. Its silver face glows faintly in the moonlight streaming through the front windows, and I notice that the hands don't move smoothly like a modern timepiece. Instead, they jerk forward in small, irregular increments, accompanied by unnaturally loud ticks that seem to echo in the quiet room. The watch face itself is mesmerizing. The pale yellow background has an organic quality like aged bone or ivory, and the black numerals are etched deep into the surface. The hands are made of what looks like blackened silver, and they cast tiny shadows on the face that shift and dance with each tick. The first few minutes pass quietly. The house settles around me with the typical groans and sighs of old wood adjusting to temperature changes. Outside, I can hear the wind rustling through the oak trees and the distant sound of night insects beginning their evening chorus. A car passes on the rural road beyond the property, its headlights briefly illuminating the front lawn, before disappearing into the darkness. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things begin to change. The temperature starts to drop, just a degree or two at first. I pull my sweater tighter and attribute it to the old house's poor insulation. But within minutes the cold becomes more noticeable, making me shiver despite my warm clothing. My breath begins to form small, visible clouds in the moonlight, and I watch in fascination as frost starts to form on the inside of the windows. The frost doesn't spread uniformly across the glass. Instead, it forms in deliberate patterns, spirals and geometric designs that look almost like writing in a language I don't recognize. The patterns pulse and shift, growing more complex with each passing minute. The pocket watch grows heavier in my hands, and its ticking becomes more erratic. Sometimes it races, the hands spinning wildly around the face. Other times it stops completely, the silence more unsettling than the noise. During these moments of stillness, I can hear other sounds, faint at first but growing steadily louder. Footsteps on gravel. At first, I think it might be a late arriving family member, or perhaps a neighbour taking an evening walk. But the footsteps are too slow, too deliberate, and they seem to circle the house rather than approach the front door. The sound multiplies, 2 sets of footsteps, then 3, then so many that it sounds like a crowd gathering outside. I force myself to keep my eyes on the pocket watch, remembering grandmother Elena's warnings about not acknowledging what I see or hear. But the temptation to look out the windows is almost overwhelming. The footsteps continue their slow circuit of the house, accompanied now by other sounds, the rustle of clothing, the soft murmur of voices too distant to understand. At 5 minutes past midnight, according to the watch, the footsteps stop. The sudden silence is deafening after the constant sound of movement. But it doesn't last long. Within moments, a new sound fills the air. Children laughing. It starts as a single voice, high and sweet, the kind of innocent laughter that should bring joy. But there's something wrong with it, something hollow and echoing, as if the sound is coming from very far away, or from the bottom of a deep well. The laughter is joined by other children's voices, then adult voices, creating a chorus of mirth that makes my skin crawl. The voices are calling out now, words I can almost but not quite understand. They seem to know I'm here, seem to be trying to get my attention. The pocket watch grows even heavier, and I notice that my hands are shaking. Whether from cold or fear, I can't tell. At 7 minutes past midnight, they begin tapping on the windows. It starts with a single, soft tap against the glass directly in front of me, like someone gently knocking to get my attention. Then, another tap, and another, spreading to the other windows around the parlour. The tapping grows more insistent, more rhythmic, like fingertips drumming impatiently against the glass. Through my peripheral vision, I catch glimpses of movement outside. Pale shapes pressing against the windows, faces that look almost human, but wrong somehow. Too thin, too pale, with eyes that reflect the moonlight like an animal's. The shapes move from window to window, and I can hear them whispering my name. Marcus. The voice is soft, almost loving. Marcus, we've been waiting for you. I grip the pocket watch tighter and force myself to stare at its face. The hands are moving erratically now, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, as if time itself is becoming unstable. Marcus, please look at us. We're family. We belong here just as much as you do. The voice is closer now, as if someone is standing just outside the window directly in front of me. The tapping becomes more urgent, more demanding. We're so cold out here, Marcus, so cold and so alone. Please let us in. Please open the door. More voices join in, a chorus of pleading that tugs at my heart despite my terror. They sound like real people, desperate, frightened people who need help. But I remember the journal entries, remember Frederick and Amanda and all the others who thought they could safely break the rules. At 10 minutes past midnight, the pocket watch stops entirely. The silence is absolute. No ticking, no movement of the hands, just dead metal in my palm. The temperature in the room plummets so rapidly that ice begins forming on the furniture around me. My breath comes out in great billowing clouds, and I can feel the cold seeping through my clothes and into my bones. In the supernatural silence, I hear a voice calling my name, but this one is different from the others. It's not pleading or demanding, it's warning. Marcus, don't listen to them. The voice is faint but urgent, coming from somewhere inside the house rather than outside. They're not family. They're what's left of family, the pieces that couldn't move on. I recognize the voice now. It's Thomas, grandmother Elena's brother, the one who broke the vigil rules in 1945. But that's impossible. Thomas died years ago in the care facility. The watch is your anchor. Thomas's voice continues, growing fainter. As long as you hold it and stay in the chair, they can't reach you. But they're getting stronger every year. Soon the watch won't be enough. The voices outside reach a crescendo, no longer pleading, but demanding, angry, promising terrible things if I don't let them in. The tapping on the windows becomes violent pounding, and I swear I can hear the sound of fingernails scraping against glass. Let us in, Marcus. The voice outside is no longer sweet or loving. It's harsh and commanding. You can't hide behind old rules forever. We are your family. We have rights. At 12 minutes past midnight, the pocket watch suddenly springs back to life, its hands moving so fast they blur. The voices outside reach a fever pitch of rage and frustration, and the temperature in the room drops so low that the moisture in my breath instantly crystallizes and falls like snow. Something begins pounding on the front door with tremendous force, making the entire house shake. The sound echoes through the rooms like thunder, and I hear glasses rattling in the kitchen cabinets and picture frames vibrating against the walls. Open the door! The voices are screaming now, no longer even pretending to be human. Open the door and let us come home. The pounding grows more violent, and I'm certain the door is going to splinter under the assault. But somehow it holds, protected perhaps by the same forces that keep me safe in the vigil chair. At 14 minutes past midnight, something new happens. The basement door, visible through the parlour doorway at the end of the hall, begins to rattle violently. Not just the door itself, but the heavy iron lock that grandmother Eleanor had secured it with. The rattling is rhythmic, purposeful, as if something on the other side is systematically trying to break through. The sounds from outside and below merge into a cacophony of supernatural rage. Pounding, rattling, scratching, screaming voices demanding entry. The house shakes under the assault, and I'm amazed that the other family members aren't waking up from the noise. But perhaps they are awake. Perhaps they're lying in their beds, following the rules by remaining silent and still, trusting that the vigil will keep them safe for another night. At exactly 12:15, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimes once, and everything stops. The voices cut off mid-scream. The pounding and rattling cease instantly. The temperature begins to slowly return to normal, though frost still clings to the windows and furniture. The pocket watch resumes its normal, irregular ticking, and I realize my hands are cramped from gripping it so tightly. I remain seated for several more minutes, waiting for my heart rate to return to something approaching normal. The silence feels different now, not supernatural and oppressive, but simply the quiet of a sleeping house. When I finally feel steady enough to stand, I carefully place the pocket watch on the side table and make my way upstairs on shaking legs. But before I reach the staircase, I can't resist looking back at the front windows. The frost is already melting, leaving only streaks of moisture on the glass, but pressed into the condensation, barely visible, are handprints, dozens of them, large and small, covering every window that faces the parlour. I don't sleep well that night. Every creak of the old house makes me jump, and when I do manage to drift off, I dream of pale faces pressed against dark windows, of voices calling my name from somewhere far away. The dreams are so vivid that I wake several times thinking I hear footsteps in the hallway outside my room. When morning finally arrives, bringing with it the normal sounds of a house full of family, I feel a tremendous sense of relief. The smell of coffee and bacon drifts up from the kitchen, and I can hear my nieces playing in the hallway outside my room. In daylight, the events of the previous night feel almost like a dream, terrifying at the time, but somehow less real in the warm sunshine streaming through my bedroom window. Almost like a dream, but not quite, because when I look out my bedroom window at the rose garden below, I can see footprints in the soft earth between the flower beds. Dozens of them, both large and small, circling the garden's perimeter but never crossing the wrought iron gate. The footprints are too numerous and too varied in size to have been made by any single person, and they form patterns that suggest hours of restless movement around the garden's boundaries. At breakfast, Grandmother Elena asks how my vigil went, her sharp eyes studying my face intently. Uneventful, I lie, not wanting to worry the others or add to the already tense atmosphere in the house, but she studies my face for a long moment, and I see understanding dawn in her eyes. She knows exactly what I experienced, has probably experienced similar things herself during her own vigil shifts over the decades. "They're more active this year," she says quietly when the others aren't listening. "More restless, more aggressive. I fear they're growing stronger with each passing year." "Who are they, Grandma?" I ask the question that's been haunting me since childhood. She glances around to make sure we won't be overheard, then leans closer. "Family," she says simply, "all the ones who broke the rules over the years. They can't move on, can't rest. They're trapped here, bound to this house and this land by their own choices. But why do they want to come inside? Because they're cold and alone and desperate to rejoin the family they lost. But they're not really our relatives anymore. They're something else, something hungry and dangerous. The rules keep them outside, keep the living separate from the..." She struggles for the right word. "From the remnants." The conversation is interrupted by Emma, who wanders into the kitchen carrying one of her disturbing drawings. This one shows the house surrounded by dark figures, but now there are also figures inside the house, faint ghostly shapes standing in doorways and lurking in corners. "The sad people are getting closer," Emma announces matter-of-factly. "They really want to come to the family reunion." Jessica quickly takes the drawing away, but not before I notice the detail Emma has included. The figures inside the house are standing in specific locations: the parlour, the basement door, the second floor windows, places that correspond exactly to the focal points of our family's rules. The rest of Saturday passes more normally than the first day. We take walks around the property during daylight hours, careful to avoid the rose garden, but exploring the woods and meadows that surround the house. The property is quite extensive, nearly 50 acres of mixed woodland and open pasture, with a small stream running through the eastern section. The woods themselves are beautiful in a wild, untamed way. Towering oaks and maples create a canopy that filters the sunlight into dapple patterns on the forest floor. Wildflowers bloom in small clearings, and we spot several deer grazing in the meadows. But there's something unsettling about the deeper parts of the woods, areas where the trees grow so close together that very little light penetrates to the ground. Those areas feel watched, as if unseen eyes are following our movements. Uncle Norman, despite his age, insists on taking a long walk through the property. He uses his cane carefully on the uneven ground, but his eyes are sharp and alert as he surveys the landscape. The boundaries are getting weaker, he tells me quietly as we walk. Used to be the activity was confined to the immediate area around the house. Now it's spreading throughout the property. What do you mean? See those dead patches in the grass? The places where nothing grows. He points with his cane to several areas where the vegetation has died in perfect circles, leaving only bare earth. Those are new. Wasn't like that 5 years ago. He's right. There are dead spots scattered throughout the meadows, places where not even weeds will grow. The soil in these areas looks different too, darker and somehow oily, as if it's been contaminated by something unnatural. And look there, Norman continues, indicating a section of woods where several large trees have fallen in what appears to be a perfect straight line. Trees don't fall like that naturally. Something's changing about this place, something that goes deeper than just the house. We return to the house as afternoon shadows begin to lengthen, and I notice that several family members gravitate toward the windows that offer views of the rose garden. There's something hypnotic about those dark red blooms, something that draws the eye and holds it. Rachel and Rebecca, the Hendricks twins, spend nearly an hour standing at the kitchen window that overlooks the garden's eastern edge. When I ask them what they find so fascinating, they exchange one of their meaningful twin looks. The roses are different this year, Rachel says finally. Different how? Bigger, Rebecca adds. More vibrant, like they're feeding on something. The observation sends a chill down my spine. The roses do look unusually healthy and abundant for this time of year. Their dark red blooms almost luminescent in the afternoon light. But there's something unsettling about their perfection, something that suggests growth fueled by unnatural means. As evening approaches, the familiar tension returns to the house. Conversations become stilted and nervous, and family members begin glancing at their watches with increasing frequency. The window protocol will go into effect at 9 o'clock, and I can feel everyone's anxiety building as that hour approaches. My cousin Michael volunteers for the second night's vigil. He's 35 years old and has always been the skeptical one in the family, the one who rolled his eyes at grandmother Elena's stories and made jokes about our quaint family traditions. He's an engineer by profession, a man who believes in facts and logic and rational explanations for everything. I'm curious to see what all the fuss is about, he tells me with a confident smile. Probably just old house sounds and overactive imaginations. I want to warn him, to tell him about my experience the previous night, but something stops me. Maybe he needs to learn the truth for himself. Maybe the house needs him to understand. Dinner is another subdued affair, though the food is excellent as always. Patricia has prepared a traditional pot roast with vegetables, and the smell fills the dining room with homey comfort that seems to push back against the house's oppressive atmosphere. But as darkness falls outside the tall windows, the comfort fades and the familiar tension takes its place. Emma continues to interact with invisible presences, talking to empty corners and sometimes laughing at things only she can see. But tonight her behaviour is different. She seems more agitated, more frightened. "They're angry," she tells her mother during dinner. "The sad people are very angry tonight. They say someone promised to let them in, but the promise was broken." "Who promised them that, sweetheart?" Jessica asks, trying to keep her voice light. "I don't know, but they're not sad anymore. They're mad. They want to come inside and be warm, and they don't understand why they can't." After dinner, I find myself drawn once again to the library and its collection of family accounts. I pull down the leather-bound journal and turn to more recent entries, looking for clues about what might be different this year. From last year's reunion, the vigil phenomena were more intense than ever before. The voices weren't just outside the house. Some seemed to be coming from inside the walls themselves. The basement door rattled constantly, and I swear I heard footsteps on the second floor during the silence hour, even though everyone was supposed to be asleep. The watch stopped for nearly 5 minutes, and during that time, the house felt like it was being invaded by something vast and hungry. From 3 years ago, I saw them clearly for the first time. Figures pressed against every window, their faces pale and distorted with longing. They weren't all strangers. I recognized Great Uncle Frederick, Cousin Amanda, even people who died decades before I was born. They were all there, all trying to get inside, all begging to be reunited with the family they lost. The accounts paint a picture of escalating supernatural activity, with each year bringing more intense phenomena than the last. But this year's tension feels different somehow. Not just more intense, but more focused, as if building towards some kind of climax. At 11:30, I make my way to the parlour to see Michael, off on his vigil shift. He's sitting in the high-backed chair, looking relaxed and confident, the pocket watch resting casually in his palm. "Any advice for a first-timer?" he asks with a grin. "Follow the rules, exactly," I tell him. "Don't try to test anything, or prove anything. Just sit still, hold the watch, and wait for it to be over." He nods, but I can see the skepticism in his eyes. He's expecting a boring 30 minutes of sitting in a chair. Not the supernatural assault I experienced the night before. Grandmother Elena appears in the doorway, looking more frail and worried than ever. She exchanges a few words with Michael, emphasizing the same warnings she gave me, then reluctantly leaves him alone in the parlour. I go upstairs to my room but don't even try to sleep. Instead, I sit by my window watching the rose garden in the moonlight and waiting to see what the night will bring. The garden looks particularly ominous in the darkness. Its carefully maintained paths creating geometric patterns that seem to shift and change in the moving shadows. At exactly midnight, the temperature in my room begins to drop, just as it had during my own vigil. Frost forms on my bedroom window, and I can hear the familiar sounds beginning downstairs. Footsteps on gravel, voices calling out, the sound of something pressing against the windows. But tonight the sounds are different, louder, more aggressive, more desperate. The footsteps don't just circle the house. They pound across the porch and up to the front door. The voices aren't pleading. They're demanding, threatening. Through my window I can see figures moving in the rose garden, dozens of them pressing against the wrought iron gate. They're trying to get in, trying to cross the boundary that has kept them out for generations. The gate itself is glowing faintly, as if some invisible force is straining against it. The sounds from downstairs grow more violent. I hear glass breaking, wood splintering, and Michael's voice calling out in terror and confusion. He's breaking the rules, speaking during the vigil, acknowledging the supernatural forces that surround him. I want to run downstairs to help him, but I know that would only make things worse. The vigil must be completed according to the rules, or the protective barriers around the house will fail entirely. The sounds continue for what feels like hours, but is probably only minutes. Michael's voice grows hoarse from shouting, and I hear furniture being overturned in the parlour. But gradually the sounds begin to fade, and by 12:15, silence has returned out into the house. In the morning, we find Michael in the parlour, alive but changed. He's sitting in the vigil chair, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. The pocket watch is still in his hand, but his grip is so tight that his knuckles are white. When we try to talk to him, he doesn't respond. When we try to take the watch away, he won't let go. Dr. Harrison, the local physician, who has served our family for decades, examines Michael but can find nothing physically wrong with him. His body is healthy, but his mind seems to have retreated to some unreachable place. It's like he's seen something that broke his understanding of reality, Dr. Harrison tells us quietly. I've seen similar cases before, usually in soldiers who've experienced severe trauma. But Michael's symptoms are more extreme than anything I've encountered. Patricia is devastated. Her nephew, the confident engineer who thought he could debunk our family's superstitions, now sits motionless and unresponsive, lost somewhere inside his own mind. "What did you see, Michael?" she whispers, taking his hand. "What happened down there?" But Michael doesn't answer. He just stares straight ahead, occasionally mouthing a single word. "Watch." Sunday arrives with heavy clouds and the threat of rain. The final day of our reunion has always felt different from the previous two. There's a sense of anticipation, of building towards something. But this year, with Michael's condition casting a pall over the gathering, the atmosphere is more oppressive than ever. Grandmother Elena is visibly shaken by what happened to Michael. She spends most of the morning sitting beside him, talking to him in low, urgent tones, trying to reach whatever part of his consciousness might still be accessible. But he remains unresponsive, his eyes fixed on something only he can see. "This has never happened before," she tells me privately. "The vigil keepers have always been protected, as long as they followed the rules. But Michael did follow them. I could hear him from upstairs. He never left the chair, never set down the watch." "Then why did this happen to him?" "I think they're getting stronger. The barriers that have protected us for generations are weakening, and soon even following the rules perfectly won't be enough to keep us safe." The implications of her words are terrifying. If the rules can no longer protect us, if the supernatural forces that haunt this property are growing strong enough to overcome our defenses, then our family's long-standing refuge has become a trap. At 4 in the afternoon, Grandmother Elena announces it's time for the traditional final photograph. We've taken this same picture every year for as long as I can remember. The entire family arranged on the front porch, 3 generations gathered together in a formal portrait that will join the dozens of similar photos in the family albums. But as we gather on the porch, I realize something is wrong. I count heads once, then again, trying not to be obvious about my growing panic. 22. We're missing someone. "Where's Jake?" Patricia asks, noticing the same thing. Her voice carries a note of panic that makes everyone stop what they're doing and look around. Jake, Patricia's 16-year-old son, is nowhere to be seen. We search the house systematically, calling his name and checking every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. His belongings are still in his room. Clothes, toiletries, the book he was reading. But there's no sign of him anywhere. "He was reading in the library after lunch," says Rebecca, one of the twins. "I saw him there around 2 o'clock. "I talked to him around 3, adds his mother Patricia. "He seemed fine, maybe a little restless, but fine." We expand our search to the grounds around the house, calling his name and combing through the woods and meadows. The sun is getting lower in the sky, and I can see the worry etched on Patricia's face growing deeper with each passing minute. Uncle Norman, despite his age and reliance on his cane, insists on joining the search. "Check the boundaries," he tells us grimly. The dead spots in the grass, the fallen trees. If something's taken the boy, that's where it would happen. But our search of the property's boundaries reveals nothing. No sign of Jake, no indication of where he might have gone, or what might have happened to him. It's as if he simply vanished somewhere between the library and dinner time. "We have to take the photograph," Grandmother Elena announces as the sun begins to set. "The rules don't wait for missing family members." "We can't take a family photo without Jake," Patricia protests, her voice breaking with desperation and grief. "We must," Grandmother Elena insists, her voice heavy with decades of painful experience. 24 positions, as always. We'll place a chair for him. Reluctantly, we arrange ourselves on the porch in the traditional formation. An empty wooden chair sits in the front row where Jake should be, a stark reminder of his absence. The photographer, a local man who has been taking our reunion pictures for decades, sets up his equipment with the solemnity of someone documenting a funeral. As the camera flash goes off, I have a terrible feeling that we're documenting something that will end in tragedy. The empty chair seems to mock us, a symbol of our failure to protect one of our own. By 6 o'clock, Jake still hasn't returned, and the sun is setting behind the tree line. The window protocol will go into effect in 3 hours, and I can see the panic building in Patricia's eyes as she realizes her son will be missing during the most dangerous night of our reunion. "We have to keep looking," she insists. "We can't just give up on him." But Grandmother Elena shakes her head sadly. "The rules apply whether we like it or not. At 9 o'clock the curtains must be drawn. At midnight someone must take the vigil. The house doesn't care about our personal tragedies." Several of the men organize search parties to comb the woods one more time before darkness falls completely. They take flashlights and spread out across the property, calling Jake's name and checking every possible hiding place. But as darkness settles over the land, they return empty-handed and grim-faced. I volunteer to search the house one more time, focusing on areas we might have missed earlier. The attic, storage closets, even the small spaces under the stairs. As I make my way through the second floor, checking each room methodically, I find myself drawn to Jake's bedroom at the end of the hallway. The room is exactly as he left it. Bed unmade, clothes scattered on the floor. A paperback novel lying open on the nightstand. But something feels wrong about the space. Something that makes my skin crawl with unease. The window, Jake's bedroom window, faces the rose garden, just like mine does. But unlike the other second floor windows, this one still has its curtains open, even though sunset has already passed and the window protocol should be in effect. I check my watch, 8:45, 15 minutes until the 9 o'clock deadline. I should close those curtains immediately before the protection they provide is needed. But something stops me, some instinct that makes me approach the window cautiously. Looking down at the rose garden, I can see something that makes my blood run cold. The wrought iron gate, which has been closed and latched for as long as I can remember, is standing wide open. And there, barely visible in the growing darkness, is a figure walking among the rose bushes. It's Jake. He's moving slowly through the garden, stopping at each rose bush to examine the dark blooms. Even from this distance, I can see that something is wrong with the way he's moving. His gait is too fluid, too graceful, like he's floating just above the ground rather than walking on it. Relief floods through me at seeing him alive, but it's immediately replaced by terror as I realize what his presence in the garden means. He's violated the garden boundary, the rule that forbids family members from entering that space during the dark hours, and based on our family's history, that violation is almost certainly fatal. I have two choices. I can follow the window protocol, draw the curtains as required, and hope that Jake somehow finds his way back to safety on his own. Or I can break the rules myself, open the window, and call out to him, try to guide him back to the house before it's too late. The clock on the nightstand reads 8:57. 3 minutes until the window protocol goes into effect. 3 minutes to make a decision that could save Jake's life or doom us both. I think about grandmother Elena's warnings, about Frederick and Amanda and all the others who thought they could safely break the rules. I think about Michael sitting catatonic in the parlour downstairs, his mind shattered by whatever he encountered during his vigil. But I also think about Patricia, devastated by her son's disappearance, and about Jake himself, a 16-year-old boy who doesn't fully understand the dangers that surround this house. The decision makes itself. Without allowing myself time to reconsider, I grab the curtains and yank them open wide, flooding the room with the last rays of twilight. Then I throw open the window and lean out into the cool evening air. "Jake!" I call out as loudly as I dare. "Jake, you need to get out of the garden. It's not safe." The effect is immediate and terrifying. The moment the curtains open and evening light floods through the window, a sound like breaking glass echoes through the house, followed by a wail of anguish so loud and piercing that it seems to come from the walls themselves. Every door in the house slams shut simultaneously, with thunderous crashes that make the old structure shake on its foundations. The temperature plummets instantly, far more dramatically than during either of the previous night's vigils. Frost forms on every surface in the room within seconds, and my breath comes out in great billowing clouds that crystallize and fall like snow. But far worse than the cold is the darkness that seems to pour through the open window like thick, oily smoke. It's not the absence of light, but something more substantial, more malevolent, a living darkness that carries with it the weight of decades of accumulated malice and hunger. Jake looks up from the garden at the sound of my voice, but his face is wrong. His features are the same, but his eyes are completely black, reflecting no light at all. When he smiles, I can see that his teeth have become sharp and pointed, like an animal's. "Thank you, Marcus," he says, and his voice carries clearly across the distance despite being no louder than a whisper. "Thank you for opening the way." I back away from the window, but it's too late. The protective barriers that have kept our family safe for generations are broken, and I can feel something ancient and hungry rushing in to fill the void. Voices rise from every corner of the house, the same voices I heard during my vigil, but now they're inside, no longer held back by rules and traditions and carefully maintained boundaries. They're angry, triumphant, eager to claim what they've been denied for so long. The darkness pouring through the window begins to take shape, forming into translucent figures that fill Jake's room. Adults and children, in clothing from different eras, their faces pale and distorted with longing and rage. Some I recognize from old family photographs, relatives who died during previous reunions, trapped on the property by their own violations of the family rules. Great Uncle Frederick stands near the door, looking exactly as he did in 1987, his face bearing the same expression of terror and understanding that Uncle Norman had described. Cousin Amanda appears beside the window, still wearing the nightgown she died in, her skin blue-white with supernatural cold. But there are others too, many others, decades worth of family members who thought they could outsmart the rules, or who simply made fatal mistakes. They fill the room like a congregation of the dead, and all their eyes are fixed on me with hungry anticipation. "Welcome to the reunion, Marcus," Frederick says with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "We've been waiting so long for you to join us." "You don't understand," I gasp, backing toward the door. "I was trying to save Jake. I was trying to help." "Jake is beyond help now," Amanda says, her voice like wind through dead leaves. "He crossed the garden boundary of his own free will. But you broke the window protocol to call out to him. You chose to violate the rules." I understand now with horrible clarity what has happened. Jake's presence in the garden wasn't an accident or a moment of teenage rebellion. It was bait, carefully arranged to force exactly this choice. The supernatural forces that inhabit this property have been waiting for decades for someone to break the rules during the crucial transition period between day and night, when the barriers are at their weakest. The rules weren't designed to protect all of us. They were designed to protect most of us, while ensuring a steady supply of victims to appease whatever ancient hunger lives in this place. Every generation, someone breaks a rule. Someone makes a mistake. Someone feeds the darkness that has claimed this land and keeps the rest of the family safe for another year. But this year the hunger demanded more. This year it wanted both Jake and someone to break the rules, trying to save him. The spirits close in around me, and I can feel the cold spreading through my body, starting from my extremities and working inward. My heartbeat slows, my breathing becomes shallow, and a strange peace begins to settle over me, despite my terror. In my final moments of consciousness, I understand the terrible truth about our family reunions. This house, this land, feeds on Thompson blood. It has since the day great-great-grandfather Ezekiel built the mansion in 1872, perhaps since long before that, when this land belonged to other people with other names. The rules exist to regulate the feeding, to ensure it happens in a controlled manner that doesn't destroy the entire family line. They create a system where the supernatural forces that claim this territory receive their tribute without wiping out their source of sustenance. Every Memorial Day we gather to remember the dead, but we also gather to provide the dead with fresh company, to maintain the balance between the living and the remnants of the living that ensures our family's continued survival. Jake appears in the doorway, but he's translucent now, just like the others. The darkness in his eyes has been replaced by a terrible sadness, and when he looks at me, I can see the real Jake trapped somewhere behind the supernatural force that now inhabits his body. "I tried to resist," he whispers, "but they showed me Amanda in the garden and Frederick in the basement, and all the others. They showed me how lonely they were, how much they missed being part of the family. I thought if I joined them, I could help them somehow." "And I thought I could save you," I reply, my voice growing weaker as the cold spreads through my chest. "We both thought we were being heroes," Jake says sadly, "but we were just being human, and this place feeds on human compassion as much as it feeds on human blood." The room grows darker as my vision begins to fade. The last thing I see clearly is the empty chair that was placed in our final family photograph, and I realize it wasn't meant for Jake at all. It was meant for me. Next year there will be 21 living family members at the reunion. They'll arrange themselves carefully for the traditional photograph, placing 2 empty chairs in the front row. And somewhere in that picture, if you look closely enough, you'll see 2 new translucent figures standing at the edge of the frame. Jake and me, forever part of the family reunion that happens every Memorial Day. The reunion where the dead outnumber the living, and the gap grows smaller every year. The reunion that never really ends, because once you join it, you can never leave. As consciousness fades completely, I hear Grandmother Elena's voice calling from somewhere far below, her words echoing through the house with desperate urgency. "The barriers are broken. Everyone stay in your rooms. Do not come downstairs. Do not open any doors." But it's too late for warnings now. The damage is done, the ancient contract violated. The rules that have kept our family safe for 6 generations lie in ruins, shattered by my single moment of compassion and Jake's tragic curiosity. In the growing darkness of my failing consciousness, I see the truth that has been hidden from us for so long. The Thompson family didn't just inherit this house. We were brought here, chosen specifically for this purpose. Great-great-grandfather Ezekiel didn't build his mansion on random land. He was drawn to this place by the same supernatural forces that now claim Jake and me. lured by promises of prosperity and protection that came with a terrible price. The land itself is hungry, has been hungry since long before our family arrived. It fed on the Native Americans who once called this place home, on the settlers who came before us, on anyone foolish enough to build their lives on soil that thirsts for human essence. But our family provided something different, a sustainable source of sustenance, a bloodline that could be harvested generation after generation without completely destroying the supply. The rules weren't created to protect us from random supernatural forces. They were designed as a feeding schedule, a careful system that ensured the land received its tribute while maintaining just enough survivors to continue the family line. Every Memorial Day we gather, not just to remember the dead, but to provide fresh recruits for their ever-growing ranks. But something has changed in recent years. The supernatural hunger has grown stronger, more demanding, less satisfied with the traditional single victim per reunion. The rules that once provided adequate protection have become insufficient, and the forces that inhabit this place are no longer content to wait patiently for their annual offering. They want more. They want all of us. Jake's presence in the garden wasn't random teenage rebellion. It was a carefully orchestrated trap designed to force exactly the choice I made. The supernatural inhabitants of this property understand human nature, understand that our family bonds and protective instincts can be turned against us. They knew that someone would try to save him, and in doing so would create the opening they needed to break down the barriers that have contained them for so long. As the cold spreads through my heart and my vision goes dark, I realize that this Memorial Day reunion will be remembered as the last one. With the protective rules broken and the supernatural forces free to roam throughout the house, the remaining 21 family members won't survive the night. The careful balance that has sustained our family for generations is about to tip into complete destruction. The land will finally get what it has always truly wanted. Not a sustainable harvest, but a feast that will consume every living Thompson and leave nothing but ghosts and memories. In my final moment of awareness, I hear the sound of doors opening throughout the house despite grandmother Elena's warnings. The supernatural forces that have been contained for so long are now free to move through every room, to claim every family member, to end the Thompson bloodline once and for all. The last thing I experience is a profound sadness, not for myself, but for all the family members who thought they were safe, who trusted in traditions they didn't fully understand, who came to this reunion expecting nothing more dangerous than old family stories and uncomfortable memories. They deserved better than to become feeding stock for an ancient hunger that masquerades as family tradition. Then the darkness takes me completely, and I join the growing crowd of translucent figures that will forever haunt the Thompson family property. But, unlike the previous generations of victims, Jake and I won't be alone in death. By tomorrow morning, we'll have plenty of company. Aunts and uncles and cousins and nieces, all of us reunited in the eternal Memorial Day gathering that never ends. The living room will finally live up to its name, filled permanently with the living dead who remember what it was like to be human, but can never be human again. And somewhere in the basement of the old Victorian mansion, whatever ancient presence first claimed this land will finally be satisfied, its hunger sated by the complete consumption of the family that has fed it for over a century and a half. The property will stand empty after that, waiting for the next family to discover it, to fall in love with its Gothic charm and historical significance, to move in and establish new traditions without understanding the true nature of the land they've chosen to call home. Because the hunger never truly dies. It just waits, patient as the grave, for fresh blood to sustain it through another generation of careful feeding. The cycle will begin again, as it has begun again countless times before our family arrived, and as it will continue long after the Thompson name is forgotten. The house will remain beautiful and inviting, a perfect trap waiting for the next victims to discover the joy of family reunions and the terrible price of breaking ancient rules. And every Memorial Day, for as long as the house stands, the dead will gather to remember the living they once were, and to welcome the new additions to their ever-growing family of ghosts. The reunion that never ends, because death is just the beginning of a much longer and more terrible kind of family obligation. In the darkness that consumes me, I can hear them all now. Generations of Thompsons who thought they understood the rules, who believed they could navigate the supernatural dangers that surrounded them, who discovered too late that some family traditions are less about honouring the past and more about feeding the hungry shadows that lurk between the living and the dead. We are all together now, all 23 of us from this year's gathering, plus Jake and me, plus all the others who came before. A family reunion that includes every Thompson who ever lived and died on this cursed land, united at last in the eternal Memorial Day celebration that is both our final tradition and our greatest tragedy. The house grows quiet as dawn breaks over the Pennsylvania countryside, its windows dark and its rooms empty of living breath. But, to supernatural senses, the mansion has never been more alive, filled with the whispered conversations and phantom laughter of a family that has finally been reunited completely. And in the rose garden behind the house, the dark red blooms grow more vibrant than ever, fed by the essence of 25 souls who learned too late that some family traditions are meant to kill you. The Thompson family reunion happens every Memorial Day, just as it always has. The only difference is that now everyone who attends stays forever.